I was in Year 5, I started a petition, got 4,000 votes and had a building next to an airport in Canberra renamed to the David Warren Complex. You have to persist and you have to ask if you want anything, and you have to remember to have a clear goal in your head.
Good morning everyone. Thank you all for having me today. This is my first time public speaking like this out of school, so I'm pretty excited. Today I'm going to tell you my story about how a 10-year-old girl in Year 5 started a petition, got 4,000 votes and had a major building next to the Canberra airport renamed to the David Warren Complex after the great Aussie inventor of the black box, David Warren. My story starts back in 2005 when I was just 3 years old. And although I didn't know it at the time, I had a very unusual hobby for a 3-year-old. I just loved watching air crash investigations. So when my friends told me that they were going on luxurious holidays to Europe and France, I was the first to warn them about the dangers of air travel. By the time I was done with them, I left them sure that they were doomed for certain death, because I in fact hadn't seen an air crash investigation where the plane hadn't crashed. Unfortunately, this made some of the preschoolers very scared, and my mum received a call from the head of the preschool. It's probably best that your daughter Eve stops watching air crash investigations because she's beginning to scare the other children. After a few more of these calls, I'd learnt to keep my mouth shut, but this didn't stop me from watching air crash investigations. I let my passion for aviation develop. Fast forward a few years to 2012. I returned from a family holiday where miraculously the plane doesn't crash, only to find out the very next day I have to pick the famous Australian I have to complete a major school assignment on. I stressed. I asked my dad, "Dad, think of a famous Australian." Dawn Fraser, amazing swimmer. Anyone else? Thorpe, he was inspirational. Not really looking for a swimmer. Shane Warne. After a few more of these, I said, "Dad, is there anyone that isn't a sports person?" I think the inventor of the black box is Australian. I'm not sure. I wouldn't know his name. Within a minute, my iPad and Wikipedia had confirmed that he was indeed Australian, and his name was David Warren. I was amazed. I had known what the black box was since I was just 3 years old. I didn't know that the man who invented it was Australian. His invention had saved so many lives. How come nobody knew his name? So, when my parents' friends would come over, I would ask them, "Do you know what the black box is?" "No." "Do you know who invented it?" "No." "Do you know where it was invented?" "America?" Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew where it was invented. I decided that I would make this my project, and I would do a video on it. I let this thought ponder in the back of my mind. I let myself think, how come nobody knew who he was, as I got to work making a video. I wrote a script and I filmed it. And after a lot of editing, I just had one long story of myself talking in front of the camera with a lot of information. I looked at it back and I thought to myself, this is boring. So, I talked to my friend at soccer. Her dad was a Qantas A380 pilot, and I asked if I could interview him. He said to me, "Don't interview me. I can find you someone much more important." He ended up getting me in contact with Captain Woodward, who at the time was a Qantas A380 pilot and also the Vice President of the Australian and International Pilots Association. He sounded very important to me. I got in contact with him and called him up. My first interview was booked. My dad told me that he would film, but when the day came around, he chickened out, telling me he wasn't confident with a complicated work camera, but not to worry because he'd arranged a cameraman. I arrived prepared with my newly found cameraman. During my preparation, I read a book called QF32. This book documented what happened on a Qantas A380 when the engine exploded and ripped into the fuselage, almost causing the biggest single-plane air crash in aviation history, but was saved by the pilot and also the author of the book, Captain Richard Champion de Crespigny. I was so nervous for this interview. My dad told me he remembered this name, and he looked up it on his company database, and sure enough, Captain de Crespigny's details came up. Now, he said, before he thought, he just called him up. "Hi Richard, are you the same Richard who wrote this book?" "Yeah." "Talk to my daughter Eve. She is doing a video on David Warren." Before Richard had the chance to answer, and before I had the chance to think, Dad handed the phone to me. "Hi Captain," I faltered. Hi, I'm doing a video on David Warren, and I was wondering if I could interview you about the black box and QF32. He agreed, probably thinking, I can help a little 10-year-old with her school assignment. I think he was a bit shocked when I turned up. With my cameraman. Anyway, the interview went very well. Take a look.
Cogan, and for my latest documentary, I interviewed Captain de Crespigny. He was the pilot who saved the A380 that had an engine failure after taking off from Singapore. Here is this interview in full. Good morning, Captain de Crespigny.
Hello, Eve.
Thank you for having me in your lovely house, and thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
I have just recently read your book, and I enjoyed it. But my thought was, why did you pick the title? Out of all the titles that could have described this extraordinary event, why QF32?
Well, because it's a very short title. We'd had other titles we thought of, like Broken Wing, but that wasn't very acceptable with other things that have been happening in the airline industry. So we changed that name. We thought we need a shorter title. And so we brainstormed it. There was about 6 people. We came up with all these different titles: Crisis in the Air, Crisis over Singapore, Emergency in the Air. And we decided just to keep the title that everyone actually referred to it. They said, what about the QF32 flight?
David Warren, the inventor of the black box. What do you think about his contributions to your industry?
Well, the black box has changed aviation because you can have an accident and you can find the rubble in the ground or remnants of a car accident, and if you don't know what's happened, then you really can't determine how you're going to recover from the incident, discover what went wrong, and work out what to do as a consequence to stop the incident happening again.
This interview went on to get over 10,000 views on YouTube. It was really exciting. Anyway, back to my main video on David Warren. I began to edit this and get it ready for school. I edited until I thought it was up to a standard to hand in. Take a look.
1953. Italy. Rome. The world's first jet-powered aircraft, known as the Comet, crashes. No one knows how. No one knows why. The question on everyone's lips is, how can the most sophisticated model of its time simply fall out of the sky? England, London. While the whole world is watching, a team of investigators from England are selected to investigate the crash. Australian David Warren is one of them. This is the story of David Warren and his black box. How Australia was the first country to put a black box on an aircraft, and how we became the first nation to make it mandatory that every single aircraft must have a black box on board.
I wondered, would this be enough to get David Warren recognised? Would this be enough to get the everyday Australian to want to become an inventor rather than just a sports person? I didn't think so. At the same time, I noticed that the Canberra airport was going under some new designs, and it was getting a brand new terminal and a brand new face. I thought, a brand new design, time for a brand new name. The David Warren Airport sounds good to me. So I went online and started a petition on change.org. The petition was to rename the Canberra airport after the Australian inventor of the black box. It was aimed at Stephen Byron, the managing director. When I first put it up, this was one of the most exciting periods of my life. Every night I would come home. I got two votes, yes! After a week, I had 20. The managing director of Change.org told me that he watched my video and he liked it, so he put it on the front page. Over a day, I got 80. I was so excited. Little did I know what was to come. I began to email different news sites, asking them to run my story, asking them for more votes on my petition. Then, news.com picked it up. I got 1,000 votes in one day. When I got home from school, my dad said, "You have so many interviews." So, I did lots and lots of radio interviews all over the country. Take a listen to one of them.
Eve Cogan is just 10 years old and she doesn't even live here, but she is a bit of an aviation fanatic and she has a good idea. She's with me now. Eve, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Genevieve.
Tell me who you think the airport should be named after.
David Warren, the inventor of the black box.
Now, you'll have to explain yourself because although we've heard of the black box, not many of us know anything about who David Warren actually is.
David Warren is the inventor of the black box. The black box job is when a plane crashes, it records the data from the instruments and the last half an hour of conversation in the cockpit, so people know why the plane crashed.
Now, why is he more important than a politician or a great aviator or maybe a war hero?
Because he's saved many lives, and he's got almost no recognition, and I think he deserves a lot more.
So, that's how most of the interviews went. The next day, I hadn't done them all, so I called up the people I didn't have time for. "Hi, I can do my interview now. I'm sorry I didn't have time for you today." This is when I learned one of the most important lessons of my life. People don't report on old stories. I was yesterday's news. They were reporting on today's top story. From then on, I had to fight for every vote I got. So, I got an email ready. I told people my story, made it as interesting as possible. I found a journalist, found their email, send. Found a journalist, found their email, send. Found a journalist, found their email, send. I did this 50 times a night. And out of those 50, I may have only got one reply. But then, that was still one reply, which I wouldn't have got if I hadn't have sent the email in the first place. My biggest disappointment was SMH. No matter how hard I tried to get them on board, I emailed 6 of their journalists 5 or 6 times, but some of them replied, but the story never ran. I also didn't hear back from Stephen Byron about the petition or about any of the social media that was going on about it. The silence was deafening. I needed to get the media talking again. I needed to get them interested. So I thought, who is the most famous pilot in the world right now? Can any of you guys think of a famous pilot? No one. What about, do the words Miracle on the Hudson ring a bell to anyone? Yes. That's correct. His name was Sully Sullenberger, and he was the first pilot to successfully land on the water. Now, this was really big talk in America, and it even made it over here. Almost all aviation fanatics know about it. So I emailed him, asking him to support my petition. And guess what? He agreed. He tweeted his support to his 12,000 followers. He said, "I signed Eve Cogan's petition to rename the Canberra airport after the black box inventor David Warren. Join me and retweet." This got my petition international interest. Also after this, Captain de Crepigny joined and also signed my petition. During all this research, I had found myself a few favourite aviation journalists. My favourite was Christine Negroni. It took a few tries, but I finally got in contact with her. She was my favourite contributor to the Huffington Post, and she also had her own blog where she wrote lots of cool things. Now, when I got in contact with her over a Skype call, I told her about my conundrum. The Canberra airport's just not responding to me. I've tried my hardest. I've got so many votes. She told me, let me look after that. She, I later found out, had called Canberra Airport. That's what triggered a call from Stephen Byron one Friday afternoon. He told me, Yeah, it's a good idea, but it probably won't happen. I'll call you back in a few weeks. I'm going on holidays now. We'll think of some new ideas to support your petition. He was a bit dismissive, and I was upset that he hadn't watched my video. But then again, I can sort of feel for him. Not many people who run major airports have little 10-year-old girls asking them to change the name. During this whole time that he was away, I kept on pressuring him. I kept on getting him more votes. I kept on keeping up to date with my blog and my social media page. Someone who helped me was Ben Sanderlands from Plain Talking. He kept on publishing articles about me on Crikey. These are all the articles he posted. This is what kept the media talking throughout this long period. Finally, almost a year and a half after I had released my video, I got an email from the Canberra airport telling me that the Defence Science Technology headquarters in Canberra were going to be renamed to the David Warren Complex. I was so excited. One morning, I drove up to Canberra to attend the ceremony. The Assistant Minister of Defence was there talking, so was Jenny Warren, David Warren's daughter, and Ken Fraser, somebody who worked with David Warren to make the black box. The event was so exciting. Afterwards, Jenny Warren gave me a pair of orange earrings shaped like little black boxes, and the Defence Minister of Science and Technology told me that I could call him up and ask for a tour of his facilities whenever I wanted. Take a look at the unveiling of the ceremony. I came home so pleased and so happy. I started that petition a while ago now, so I've had some time to reflect on it. There are a few lessons which I think can be learnt from this whole ordeal. 1, if you don't ask, you won't get. People ask me, how did you get these interviews? How did you do these things? How did you get on the front page of news.com? I just asked. I asked and I asked and I asked. And sometimes I didn't get a reply. I may have sent 50 emails and only 1 replied. I may have knocked on 100 doors and only 2 opened. But that's still 2 doors that wouldn't have opened if I hadn't have knocked. If you don't ask, you won't get. Don't be afraid to ask. You have to persist. Persistence, it's the most persuasive tool. You can write some beautifully crafted English format thing which is so persuasive, but if you send it once, it can just be deleted from somebody's inbox and never seen again. Now, if you send it up to 10 times in lots of different ways, asking the same question, keep on pestering, people are going to wonder why you're so passionate about this thing and what's going on, and then it'll start to matter. I didn't just knock on those doors once and run away. I banged on them with my fists open until I was sure no one was listening. You have to persist. And lastly, you have to have a clear goal. I didn't just say, oh yeah, David Warren needs some recognition. I said, there needs to be an airport named after that man. And I didn't just say, oh yeah, any airport will do. I said, the Australian Capital Territory Airport needs to be called the David Warren Airport. You need to have a clear goal to know where you're going. So, what am I doing now? What are my new goals? I was pretty happy with how the Canberra airport went along. I didn't get the airport renamed, but I was pretty happy with what happened. I'm not going to stop trying to get David Warren recognised until the average Australian knows who he is. Now, I want him to be as well known as Shane Warne. In fact, the general Australian probably knows who Shane Warne is dating more than they know the inventor of the black box. So it's still my mission. My new mission is to get the second Sydney airport renamed. Go online, vote on my petition at change.org. The name still says Canberra Airport, but when more details come out, I'll rename it to Sydney Airport. So the moral of this story is, you don't have to be somebody amazing, somewhere amazing, to do something amazing. If you've got a laptop, you can harness the power of social media, and you can make the world a little bit better for you or the other people in it. Thank you. So let the government and the owners know, if you have not signed my petition, or know someone who benefits from David Warren's invention, urge them to sign too. My name is Eve Cogan, and together we can achieve.